Welcome to Ludonarrative Dissidents, a podcast about role-playing games, their culture, design, and play. Each episode deep dives into one tabletop RPG book, mechanic, or style of game, taking it apart to see how it works and putting it back together to understand how people play it. I'm Ross Payton, joined by Greg Stolze and James Wallace. We've all written for RPGs, published our own games, and have worked in the field for years. You can learn more about us at ludonarrativedissidents.com.
Hello and welcome to Ludonarrative Dissidents, a podcast about role-playing games, how they're made and how they're played. I'm your host for this evening, James Wallace, and I'm joined as ever by my friends Ross Payton and Greg Stolze. And today we're talking about Maelstrom, a British role-playing game from 1984, published by a subsidiary of Puffin Books. Because the British scene in the early 80s was very different to the American scene. We had an onslaught of not only Games Workshop, which was beginning to expand out into a retail chain at this point, but also from the creators of Games Workshop, Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson, had gone to Puffin Books with the idea of a series of solo game books, which they had called Fighting Fantasy, which had been astonishingly successful. We're talking millions of sales, and naturally publishers wanted to capitalize on this. Fighting Fantasy itself released the Fighting Fantasy Adventure. Fighting Fantasy itself released Fighting Fantasy, the introductory role-playing game in 1984. And there was another series, Starlight Adventures, which was solo game books for girls. This was the 80s. It was a different time. But they also released Maelstrom, a standalone single-volume role-playing game in a large format paperback book, what I believe is called a B format paperback book. It is 300 pages of cheap paper with artwork, and it's all you need to start role-playing, apart from a D10 and a D6. And this being the early 80s, it tells you how to obtain a D10, and if you can't find one, it gives you advice on how you can use a deck of cards to create random numbers from 1 to 10.
If you cannot obtain your own D10, there is an appendix showing how to whittle one out of soap.
Which was about the quality of the D10s of the time, made of cheap plastic that did not survive very long. I was actually at school with Alex Scott. He was a year or two below me.
There it is!
I never, drink. For those unaware, the Ludonarrative Dissidents drinking game is that if I say I know somebody involved with the publication, Ross says he's run a campaign of it, or Greg complains about its use of the future conditional, you have to take a drink. That is the drinking game. Anyway, I'm still in touch with Alex. He is now a professor of mathematics at a high-ranking university. And you would have thought that someone like that would go, it's a book. It's got page numbers. They tend to run from 1 to 10, the minor digits. And if you roll a d6 to determine whether it's the number on the left or the number on the right, you could use that as a randomizer as well. But he doesn't. He says, use a deck of cards, and then after you've dealt 3 or 4 cards, then shuffle them back in to get proper randomization.
And I think I'm with him there because as I was playing the choose your own adventure part of it, man, I'm like, it's hard to keep track of where I am. And if I was using the page numbers as a randomizer for one of the combats against the nameless guards, I would have got lost real fast and also would have been flipping back and forth between the same 2 or 4 numbers. So I have to be on his side rather than yours in this matter, James.
Okay, fair enough. I'll basically describe it, and then I'll come to you guys, because I am enormously fond of this game. I have, my very first published professional article was an article on Maelstrom for Warlock magazine, the Fighting Fantasy magazine, in 1985. It and I go back a long way. Played it off and on, either as campaigns or as short adventures for friends. It has a simplicity and almost a naivety that I find very appealing. It's set specifically in the 16th century in Britain. It is Tudor England. And this makes enormous sense because every school child in the UK learns about Tudor England as part of their education. You know about Henry VII and the Wars of the Roses and Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. This is an area of history that you are familiar with, and the dissolution of the monasteries, all of that stuff. It's almost in the British DNA. It's quite ground level. Most of the professions, most of the trades are regular trades. There are a few others that are more adventuresome. You can be a mercenary, you can be an assassin. And magic is in there, but it's it's still a non-standard magic system. And I dare say we'll talk about that quite a lot. But Ross, Greg, this is your first encounter with a game, an 80s British game, part of what we call the BOSR, the British old school revival or
okay.
What did you make of it?
So first off, I want to give a big thank you, shout out to one of our Kickstarter backers and members of our Discord, Kvetch, because he mailed Greg and I copies of this book. So we actually have physical books of it. There are PDFs of it, PDFs available of it somewhere, but the having the actual physical book, which actually has a little Davenese school library stamp on it, which is very endearing to it. This is from the first print in 1984. No, this is reprinted in 1986.
Yours has a stamp. Mine has an Oxfam sticker on the back. 99p.
Oh.
Wow.
Reading the first couple pages, like, it took me to like, what is this game actually about? Because it's the very first impression I got was like, it's very focused on explaining what is a role-playing game and its conventions to the player. So it's I could see that it's very introductory, trying to explain this new concept, this new hobby to the masses in 1984, which makes a lot of sense. But overall, I found it very charming. It's a very simple system, trying to handle everything in this kind of enthusiastic manner and not quite getting there all the time, but like it's a function. It looks like a functional system. It looks like you could sit down and have a good play, but like you need to, like so many other games of the early 80s, you have to do a lot of the work yourself. It's the box that has all the parts for the kit. It doesn't have the assembled thing. You have to assemble it yourself. And so that was sort of my impression of it. It was not 100% there, but like a really good first effort.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen lots and lots of games that are miles worse than this in terms of mechanical playability. It's not too complicated. It's in its core rules. It's not finicky for the sake of being finicky. It's not. This is early enough in the development that you could make something where it's really cleanly everything's a D100 roll. It didn't have to distinguish itself by having some really wild, complicated, quote unquote innovative technique. Like, I don't know, we're going to roll a bunch of dice and look for the sets that match up. Something kooky like that. So yeah, it seemed like it would work. The book came with a choose your own adventure style thing where you have to be an assassin and you make your little assassin character and then you stick him into this grimy swamp of Englandisms where who hires an assassin by having his guards run them down with a cart, beat the crap out of him, and then bring him to in front of you. It's like, you're not going to get the A game out of the guy after two guards have kicked his ass. So I just kept running through this. It's like, I did nothing right. It's the adventures of a broke ass dummy hitman. And it's like, the first run I got hit by a cart, beaten up, coerced, and died of a self-inflicted apothecary curiosity. Run 2, tried to fight the guys who ran me down with the cart and they beat me to death.
I tried to get out of the cart and that's my doom. And it's interesting because it gives you a choice. Do you make the agility roll? It's like, yeah, they both kill you. You make the roll, you die. You fail it, you die. It's an incredibly lethal solo adventure. I seem to recall that Alex was fond of Tunnels and Trolls. Because, there weren't that many fantasy games available at the time. In the UK, there definitely weren't. I think he may have seen RuneQuest, which was definitely around. He may have seen Tunnels and Trolls. He'd definitely seen Dungeons and Dragons. And that was, I think, kind of it in 1983, 1984 when this was being written. Possibly Stormbringer. I can't remember when Stormbringer came out. But yeah, there wasn't that much around to take as influences. And if you wanted solo adventures, There were the fighting fantasy ones. There were a couple of cheap imitators, because the decent imitators like Lone Wolf hadn't really kicked off by this point. Or there were the Tunnels and Trolls solo adventures, which were pretty lethal, as I recall.
I have insights and comments about it as a choose-your-own-adventure thing, because I've read pretty good choose-your-own adventures in the 21st century from Ryan North. We've talked about these, right?
Mm-hmm.
To Be or Not to Be, that
like,
is the adventure,
yeah,
Romeo
like
and or Juliet.
Strings. Yeah.
One thing about those is that the choices all matter, and there is a meaty paragraph or entire page after each choice. And here, you are making choices like every 3 or 4 lines of text. You are turning to a new page, and periodically you have to off-ramp to do a little dice off where you fight, endless series of guards whose stats aren't quite as good as yours, but they fight to the death, and I don't think you ever get a chance to heal. So the impression I got of the choose your own adventure, solo adventure was, well, the only strategy that really works for this is to never fail a roll. Because if you can do that,
I'm sorry, they're called
fine.
savings throws, Greg.
Oh,
Everything
yes.
is a saving throw.
Everything's a saving throw. And yeah, if you do not succeed, you will not be saved. You will not know salvation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like the idea of having a solo adventure within the rulebook. And there are a few games that have done that previously. Various editions of Paranoia have done that. Adventures in Tecumseh, which was one of the later, I think, early 90s versions of Tecumseh, or attempts to find a market for the Emperor of the Petal Throne property. Essentially, I think the first 2 or 3 books were solo adventures and guided your character through. But as a way to get you in, to give you a sense of the world and how it feels, I think it's really good. But the sense that this one gives you is that the world is brutal and random.
The world is actively malevolent. The 16th century in England sucks, and it will kick you right in your spotted dick at any opportunity, which
I believe that's kind of historically accurate, I have to say.
Yeah. Thematically appropriate. Yeah.
it could be an adequate preparation for playing in a role-playing game run by a rambunctious 80s 14-year-old in the golden age of antagonistic GMing. So, yeah.
I mean, this Maelstrom, I did know it is very focused on teaching you how to roleplay, what is roleplaying as a hobby. And so there are a lot of examples and a lot of there's sections of dialogue between players and GM to explain how certain things works, and a lot of examples but a lot of these examples sort of give that impression of that killer antagonist, not necessarily antagonistic, but that killer aspect of it, because in the very first example, you're being chased by these cannibals and you need to try and push the log, cross the log over the ravine, and then that you have a 30% chance of succeeding, and then you want to push the log off into the ravine before the cannibals can cross it and chase you. That's also a 30% chance. So you it's not looking good for you. And the combat example also against the cannibals later on is it ends up with all the player characters getting knocked out and captured by the cannibals. So it's very good in that regard. Yeah.
You awake to the rich smell of barbecue sauce as they rub it into your skin.
Well, kind of. Yeah.
But just mechanically and mathematically, you do tend to fail a lot in this game. There are 9 stats. They all start at 30 out of a possible 100. You then get, as I recall, 50 points to spread between them. So you could push a couple up to 55 or so, which is greater than a 50-50 chance, because you're going to be rolling against these with percentile dice. That's a lot of failure that this game is setting you up for. Actually, the longer games I've played of it, we don't tend to roll the dice an awful lot, because we avoid combat wherever possible, because there's a strong chance that it's going to be quite long and it's likely to go quite badly. There's an attack and defense roll there. It's a very simple combat system. But wounds as well, because wounds, this is not a stock fantasy game. There's no healing potions, there's no healing scrolls. There's herbs. There's quite a heavy emphasis on herbs. But the wound system is kind of interesting because you note down every wound you get separately, and then they heal separately, but at the same time. But it's it's like 1 point a day, I think. So if you've taken a light scratch, 4, that will heal in 4 days. But if you've taken 11 wounds in total, a 4 and a 7, the 4 wound will heal in 4 days. The 7 wound will take a full week to heal. And that's quite clever. I like that as a system. It feels like there's a degree of, there's no realism to it, but it feels like there's a degree of realism to it. And it does mean that you're not necessarily going to be bedbound for 2 months while you heal from a really grievous injury, though that is possible. There's some genuine cleverness in there.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Your hit points are equal to your endurance stat, so you'll probably won't have more than 40 of them. That's what, 8 licks of a sword?
At most, yeah, it depends. Daggers do a D10, so yeah.
Yeah, daggers do a D10, so call it 8 stabs with a dagger. Yeah, I'd probably die if someone stabbed me with a dagger 8 times. I'd probably die if someone stabbed me with a dagger 4 times.
Quotes from Julius Caesar. Yeah, I'd probably.
Man, I don't think I can take much more than 3-4 stabs.
Yeah.
How many of these damn senators are there?
And everybody wants their turn.
Yeah.
Part of the emphasis, part of the reason it emphasizes what is a role-playing game, what is this thing, is because there could be no presumption of the people who come across it before, because it was published by Penguin, or Puffin Books is the actual imprint. It was sold through bookstores, the same place
Puffin.
that you would pick up your fighting fantasy books, but not where there would be copies of Dungeons & Dragons available. Puffin or Penguin had previously put out a book called What is Dungeons & Dragons, written by people that Alex and I were also at school with, because their housemaster,
Sure.
Alex, and the 3 authors of What is Dungeons & Dragons, their housemaster had a mate at Penguin, who I believe was invited to dinner one day and said, there's this Dungeons & Dragons thing, I don't really get it. And the housemaster said, well, several of our boys are very enthusiastic about it.
Wait a damn second, James. Are you telling me that the course of an entire industry in a nation was determined by the interlocking business networks of people who went to fancy schools? I'm shocked.
That is exactly what I'm telling you. The What is Dungeons & Dragons authors David Honigman, Phil Parker, and John Butterfield, who was known as Chunky, subsequently wrote a series of game books called The Cretan Chronicles, set in the world of Greek myths, which is pretty good.
When you said that, I was thinking of it as Cretan, like the Ramones song, where, it means a very stupid person. And I'm like, oh, so this was like a mean parody. But no, it's actually about Crete. Okie doke.
It's someone from Crete, yeah. And it's basically, it retells bits of the great myth. They're fun.
Sure.
They're fun. There's a clever inspiration mechanic. I think it's inspiration. I have not looked at these things in 30 or 40 years.
Direct us back in time to a little bit of the conversation that we were having before we started recording, and before Ross informed me that I was, wasting all my powder on ears that weren't there. I always, whenever I shoot someone, I aim for the ear. So we were talking about the imperfections of this game and how there seems to be a weird paradox that games that are really extremely super tight don't get to be as popular as games that are good but with flaws, because individual groups, it's like the flaw is your permission to mess with it. It's like if it's a car that's running perfectly, you will never pop the hood and poke around. But once it's got that little rumble, you will start messing around and be like, oh, well, I might as well change up this timing belt. And, I could soup up this carburetor. I don't know much about cars, but I think that's a thing people do to them. And so once you have permission to start house ruling, the game feels like it's your thing in a way that it otherwise might not. You are now in a dialogue with the author as an equal, as a co-creator, rather than being the passive receiver of the game as it's given to you. And people want this, but maybe don't know they want this, because if you ask a fan, hey, do you want a game that's like 95% great and 5% a mess, they will not say yes to that. They're like, no, sell me the whole thing, you lazy game designing bastards. Sell me a complete game. And yet, once they get the flaws and start fixing it and have the pleasurable sensation of having overcome a problem, now they develop this affection for it. And it's like, oh, yeah, well, we house ruled this and that, and now the game really sings. We really fixed it. And if they go too far with it, they turn it into a fantasy heartbreaker, and it's cited in divorce court as part of the alienation of affection. Before we started, I was giving examples of the cake mix that didn't sell very well until they decided you needed to crack an egg into it, and that people who wanted to make instant cake from a box instead of flour and whatever from scratch, found it a much more satisfying experience once you had to crack that egg. Or similarly, there were record and CD and tape clubs back in the 80s in paper magazines, if you can conceive of such a thing, where to get your 10 records for $1 or 10 records for a penny sometimes, you had to take a coin and scratch off the hidden code. It was like a lottery ticket. The marketing guy who came up with this was renowned because they're like, yeah, nobody was paying any attention or answering these ads until he made it that much harder, until you had to invest the effort of scratching it off. And so that's certainly in the infancy of gaming, there was an aspect of that. And because the games were so early and nobody knew what they were doing, and we had not, there were no giants to stand upon the shoulders of yet. There was no Forge talking about, well, what makes a game good, guys? How's it fun? What make fun? People were just sort of throwing stuff at the wall to see what stuck. And people at home weren't always in the mood for wall spaghetti and would mess with things on their own and take ownership of it, which I think has helped keep it as the folk art form that it is that there is always and has always been support for the GM at home saying, well, yeah, the rules as written are fine for most groups, but I know my group, and I'm going to need to give them the tailored fit they've come to expect from my table. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're completely right. And I think particularly if this is the first game you've come across and there are visible holes in it and things that appear to be missing, it says quite early on, yes, you can use guns, and then there are no rules for guns. It invites you to come in and make this. The other thing, there's nothing odd. There are no animals in there. There are no monsters at all. This was my first published article. I wrote up rules for generating monsters for Maelstrom, and it earned me, I think, £15 from Warlock magazine. And that was the start of my road to ruin.
And that spoiled you for honest work forevermore.
It's like, well, I've been running a fanzine for a couple of years. It's like, what, you can actually make money? You don't have to spend money to publish material about games? This is a revelation. So, yeah.
What did you spend that £15 on, James? Do you remember?
I have no idea. It's interesting because, of the role-playing games that were out there, they were all the kind of fantasy, what I call fantasy mush. It's just kind of, let's take all the existing fantasy literature and the mythologies and just going to shovel them all into a big cauldron and pull out whatever you want. D&D is the prime exemplar of this. Tunnels and Trolls did the same thing. RuneQuest was its own animal very much, but I could never get my head around it. Fighting Fantasy followed that D&D style of stuff, that it's fantasy. We're not going to even define what sort of fantasy it is. It's a sort of vague Middle Ages, and, we'll give you names of armor that you might have heard about somewhere before, and the monsters might be something we've made up, or it might be something from history or mythology. Maelstrom goes, no, it's Tudor England. It's the first game I can think of with a very specific historical background. I mean, yes, I think Bushido was out by this point as well. But again, Bushido's a bit of a mush of stuff.
Bushido, my guess would be from the time it came out that it's all of Japanese history at once.
I have to admit, I don't think I've ever read it.
Yeah, written from an Orientalist outside perspective. But, yeah, go on. Sorry.
So it's interesting, but the problem is the Tudor era was fantastically exciting in terms of history, but in terms of kind of wandering adventurers, and the game does assume that you're kind of wanderers, there's not really that much for them to do. There's no dungeons, there's no wars to get involved, or, minor skirmishes to occasionally get involved with. The sample adventure in the back of the not the solo adventure, the sample adventure for you to play through, is escorting someone who you don't know, who is a mage, but you're not immediately told that. And being a mage is like being a witch. It is illegal. The use of magic is illegal, and you can bet. Alex says burnt for it. I think technically that was heretics. I think you'd be hanged for witchcraft. But, the laws changed. I could be wrong. And you need to escort them from St. Albans, which is just to the north of London, to a fair that is happening in London itself. And London, of course, much, much smaller at the time. And stuff happens along the way, but there's no plot. There's no, and you deliver this guy to somebody at the end, to a stall at the fair, and that's the end of the adventure. If you're looking for a template to construct adventures or a series of adventures or stories to tell about your wandering leather workers and beggars and nobles, because of course this is Britain and there's very much a class system, and it does suggest that the composition of your party might be that there's a noble at the top and everyone just kind of follows them around, but it doesn't really give you the structure, the narrative.
It's the Hole in the Sky adventure we played, where you had the one noble character and we all obeyed you because you were the only person with a proper sword.
Aw. Yeah, that adventure was pretty interesting because, man, they sent whoever hated that mage. They had a lot of assassins. They were sending waves of these dudes at the just assassination through body mass. Like it was
pile on top and smother him. By the way, James, when you were talking about the book says you might be burned, but I think you'd be hanged, and I'm just picturing like Tudor witch James on the pyre saying, you'll be hearing from my solicitor about this. This is highly improper. I should have been hanged.
I demand suspension.
You are all a disgrace to the witch hunting profession. Is there a manager to whom I might address a sternly worded letter?
And then a year or two later, arguably the great British fantasy role-playing game Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay comes out, and witch hunters are a really important part of that. No witch hunters in Maelstrom. Possibly, certainly in British history, we talked briefly about Matthew Hopkins in the Delta Green Countdown episode. That's the Stuarts. That's rather, or after the Civil War, so it's the Protectorate. Do I mean the Protectorate? That bit, anyway. So that's, we're talking maybe 50, 100 years later. There was a reward for witches. If you discovered someone using magic, they would absolutely give you money for that. I don't know if anyone was doing it professionally at that point.
If I was running Maelstrom, that would be the game. It's like, okay, you're going to teach a bunch of witches. You're going to set up an assembly line for real obvious witches, and then you're going to sell them all out for the reward and also as protective coloration. No one will suspect you of witchcraft if you're the guy who's constantly, in the ear of the witch hunter saying, oh, yeah,
So it's a witch pyramid scheme. Yeah. Okay.
It's a witch pyramid scheme. You get rich, no one's paying attention to your own witchcraft. Eventually, the witch hunters just believe everything you say. So anybody who makes you mad, you don't even have to curse their house and blight their cows anymore. You just have the witch hunters come and get them. That's the adventure. That's the perfect adventure for Maelstrom.
Yeah.
Cracked it.
One, you mentioned Warhammer Fantasy, and I was actually that did occur to me while I was reading as antecedent, because like especially like the attack defense skill, and in Warhammer you have like weapon skill and ballistic skill as attributes instead of like skills specifically. Do you think Maelstrom was an influence on the setting or mechanics of Warhammer Fantasy?
I don't think so, because I don't think it made much impact on the hobby. I think for a lot of people, it was their first role-playing game. It was their introduction to role-playing. But if you were already into role-play, it almost passed you by completely because it wasn't stocked in hobby stores. It's a bizarre recurring problem when mainstream publishers get into or have the idea of doing a fantasy role-play game, and then they can't get it into the hobby. And this happened with a game that it was involved in playtesting. In the early 90s, I was a freelance copy editor for Virgin Publishing, who had the rights to Doctor Who at the time. The BBC wasn't making Doctor Who at the time. Virgin kept the flame alive by publishing Doctor Who novels called The New Adventures, some of which were really good. A few of which were written by people who went on to be involved in the rebirth of Doctor Who a few years later. But one of the things they did that was covered under their license is they did a role-playing game called Time Lord. And again, it's in a single B format paperback book, simple mechanics. It's great. I playtested it with the designer Ian Marsh. The idea is it's one of those games where you play yourself and you're walking down the street one day and you spot a police box and you stick your head through the door. You go, oh my goodness, bigger on the inside, and you're away. And it's wonderful because who hasn't, as a kid, when you played Doctor Who, you didn't imagine you were the Doctor, and you didn't imagine someone else. You didn't play whoever it was, the companion du jour being the companion. It was you and the Doctor. And the game lets you do that. And they released it, and Virgin at the time were running a chain of game stores that were doing computer games, but also had a section of hobby games, board games, card games, and role-playing games. The Virgin Game Centres would not stock the role-playing game published by Virgin Publishing. That was how much the division was down in the... yes, absolutely ridiculous. Time Lord did not do well. Seek it out. It is great. For my money, I have a lot of time for the current Doctor Who role-playing game. They do a lovely job. But if you want a simple, sleek, classic Doctor Who game, Time Lord is just a joy. It's absolutely wonderful. I went off on a digression there.
Yeah, sorry. Take a drink, take a shot, or finish your drink. So one of the things that did occur to me was this is such a nice format for a complete role-playing game as basically a mass paperback with some black and white art, which is actually very good. There's a lot of really cool stuff in this, and it's just as a nice little trade paperback, $4 in Canada, so pretty cheap. Like that's a deal. Yeah, man, I just make a role-playing game in a black and white, single column. Just cheap and make it accessible and easy to carry, and like as an alternative to like what the hobby's become now is big, very beautiful looking art books, coffee table style books, and role-playing games now you want to have you are X doing Y in setting Z, and like something evocative, something like intriguing. This, like, I didn't even understand where the game was set until I like skipped ahead to the setting chapter. Like the first 20 pages, what is a role-playing game? It doesn't mention what you'll be doing at all. Like the stuff we mentioned earlier, there's magic, and there's like 2 pages explaining the Maelstrom, which is magic is real. Apparently, and that's about it. And like a lot of like the magic rules are in the character creation, profession section. A lot of the rules are like there's stuff on exorcism for the priests. Yeah, so it has kind of like some problems as well. But I did like the Maelstrom in theory, but it's very the implementation kind of work. Yeah,
my suspicion. I mean, I know it was Alex's first game, the first game he designed. I suspect the editor at Puffin had never come across one of these things before and didn't really know the best way to do it. And I think that shows the book is not well organized. It's not well because we've seen good examples now.
Who would know the optimum way to present a role-playing game? Everything was newborn. The books were like baby fawns struggling to their feet. I was going to make a comparison to Warhammer because this was the impression I got, and this was the impression from the solo adventure, so it's probably quite skewed. What I was thinking about is that, all right, you can view a game as a set of systems for answering the question, how long before I do the next cool thing? Cool things stop being special if you're like an Exalt, or if you're overpowered, if you're the glitter boy, and it's like, yeah, I know every hit's a crit. In Delta Green, when, getting to do the cool thing of actually doing something meaningful is so rare that it's a real treasure. And here seems definitely more towards the Delta Green side of that continuum, but maybe even worse, because I'm like, what cool thing am I going to do? The coolest possible thing I could do in this solo adventure is find this merchant asleep and stab him while he snoozes. That's my story. Battered assassin is coerced into stabbing equally sad man. And Warhammer, whatever you want to say about it, whatever complaints you might have about it, you always can think of the next cool thing that might happen. It's like, oh, I might get to go fight some of them rat dudes, and I can use my rapier and main gauche techniques on them. Then I can level up and switch to some cool other class and get a small vicious dog. And you have things to look forward to in Warhammer, grim and gritty as it is. Whereas in Maelstrom, I'm like, what's the good bit? When do we get to the fireworks factory?
Yeah. You look at the character sheet, and there's nothing that's really. There's got quite a lot of numbers and some equipment and stuff, but nothing that's really says this is going to be a really fun person to share a life with for a little while. And I think it's a problem for a lot of...
You're awesome. You have a 55% chance of hitting a dude with a hobnailed cudgel.
Yeah. And it was a problem of a lot of games. Like the character sheets were very numerical. There was they're hard to parse if you didn't know that particular game system. But at the same time, you want that promise that this is going to go somewhere, that you, at the very least, that your numbers are going to go up, that you're going to get better at stuff, and you're going to be able to do either new stuff or the existing stuff with more prowess. And it's hard. You look at the Maelstrom character sheet, which, some overworked graphic designer in the bowels of Penguin Book, and it's fine, but it looks very much like the Fighting Fantasy character sheet. It's a series of boxes with labels. The biggest boxes are wounds. Your wounds box is as big as your abilities box.
Oh, because you got to make notes about all the times you get wounded.
Absolutely. And at the same time, it is Britain in the early 80s. It is a fairly grim time. It's you look at the fantasy movies we were producing at the time, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Jabberwocky, Time Bandits is a pretty grim film.
Time Bandits is so good.
Oh, I love Time Bandits.
That was anybody who wasn't part of Monty Python making fantasy movies in Britain at that time.
Hawk the Slayer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Ross's face just... You all can't see it because this is an audio medium, but as soon as James said Hawk the Slayer, Ross's face lit up, and it was like he got 10 years younger for just a little. So moment.
I only saw Hawk the Slayer in 2020. I didn't see it growing up, but I saw it. But I love watching bad movies anyway. I love good movies, low budget movies, and Hawk the Slayer is so charming with its machine gun crossbow and throwing little colored balls for the magic wizard attacks and stuff like that. I love those 80s fantasy movies like that. They're very fun. So yeah.
It has
Krull.
There's some Krull as well. Yeah, there's some great ideas in Hawk the Slayer. And as a story, it kind of works, and the sword is cool, and the idea that but again, everyone's kind of doomed. There's the giant is the last of the giants. The elf is the last of the elves. The fantasy is dying out. There's this church that is very powerful, but has no actual power, no ability to do anything or save people. I saw it on a double bill with Saturn 3, which I have talked about in previous show notes, which is the post-Alien movie written by Martin Amis, starring
Harvey Keitel and Kirk Douglas. Yeah,
that's it. Saturn 3, starring Harvey Keitel, Kirk Douglas, and Farrah Fawcett, and a script by Martin Amis. And the reason you have never heard of it, it is awful. It's really very, very bad. Indeed, it's not bad good, it's just bad. But on a double bill with Hawk the Slayer, my mind was, 16, 17-year-old mind was transported.
So is it that Martin Amis doesn't understand fantasy or doesn't understand science fiction or doesn't like science fiction, and that maybe Harvey Keitel couldn't bring himself to take it seriously? Or
it's just doesn't quite hold together. Clearly the brief is do a movie like Alien, but on a much smaller budget. Martin Amis, you have to remember, is the son of Kingsley Amis, and Kingsley Amis was one of the who wrote Lucky Jim and various other seminal books of the mid-20th century, was also a great champion of science fiction as a literary form in the UK.
Okay.
Edited a number of major anthologies over here, championed young talent.
It's probably not the problem. So the problem is just they spent all their money getting Farrah Fawcett and Harvey Keitel and Kirk Douglas and didn't leave any money left for alien goo?
But the effects aren't awful. I think it's just, it doesn't really know what it is.
What a loss.
Yeah. Yes. I'll seek it
Anyway.
out at some point. Have it running on YouTube in the background. I'm sure it's on YouTube. But yeah, so there was stuff coming out. And again, and Hawk the Slayer is not distinctively British. It feels quite American. It's got that kind of tone to it. But at the same time, there are little vignettes in the woods where bandits just kind of assail people or and then Hawk appears and saves them. But it's not it's not a happy fantasy world. This is not Hobbiton by any means.
Right.
It's a grim world where grim things happen to people and you need a hero to come along and save you. And generally that's Hawk and his buddy.
Whereas, all right, how in Maelstrom can you make a Hawk or one of his buddies? It's certainly not as a starting character.
Maelstrom's not a game about heroes, I think.
It's a game about dirtbags.
At least it may have been intended to be, but it's mechanically, you can't do that. Even if you blow all your points in one stat, you're still not going to be terrifically good at it. You're still only going to be 80 out of 100 in just one, and then you're absolutely rubbish at everything else. And the examples the book gives, those little vignettes in italics, do tend to be it's you getting screwed over or trying to do the right thing and it doesn't work out.
Well, one thing we haven't even talked about yet is that Hawk the Slayer has lots of, and there technically exists in Maelstrom, is magic. And
yes,
the magic system, I like the idea of it, but the execution leaves something to desire because, James, you could explain it better than I can. But
I think on many levels, considering this is a 17-year-old who has not seen that many other role-playing games, it is brilliant because everybody at the time, and in fact continues to this day, if you're doing a magic system, you do 50 pages of spells. And what Maelstrom doesn't do that at all. The magic system's in like 5 or 6 pages. To use magic, you use magical energy to shunt reality very slightly in a different direction, depending on probability. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Alex went on to be a mathematician. So making something happen that's already fairly likely, like somebody might slip over, that's quite easy. Or a draft might blow out a candle flame. That's very easy. Causing a rock to lift off the ground, that's pretty improbable. That's not gonna, you're gonna have to pump a lot of energy into that. But you describe what you want to do as a mage. And mages all have a primary class. They all have a primary profession. They're kind of the cover story. Nobody's just, oh yes, I'm a wizard, because that's toasty mage time right there.
That's fascinating. How thick would you say your neck is, sir?
Very much. What size goose does one takes?
You look like a 12 to me. Maybe a 14. Do you like? We're gonna want it snug. Trust me, you want it snug.
So that's essentially the way magic works.
Oh, Ross, you do not want to be rattling around in there. No.
Anyway, I think the idea is that the more improbable it is, the harder it is to cast that spell. It's based off of your knowledge skill, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So even if you max out into knowledge, it's like a very 80% minus anywhere from 10% to 50% off, so if you're trying to do something very, and it costs will every time you cast a spell too, I think. Right. It's really interesting because this is the system that years later was basically replicated by Mage in the World of Darkness setting, because in Mage, they have coincidental magic and vulgar magic in Mage.
Yes.
And then
everyone wants to be somewhere where you can do the vulgar magic because that's the cool stuff.
Right.
But also you do the coincidental magic, but it's at such a higher level in Mage where it's like, oh, yeah, it doesn't have to be at all reasonable to a layman. It just has to be, something that could happen one time in a huge world of billions of people. These ridiculous Rube Goldberg coincidences are happening in Mage, whereas here it's like, wow, he is truly a powerful wizard. He has cheated at dice for an entire year with no one catching on. None is his equal. That is exactly the character I would play as a wizard, by the way.
It's a pretty good one, yeah. What we realized fairly quickly is, the other influence, the other book that everybody who was playing RPGs at this time in the UK had read was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, with the infinite improbability drive.
Oh.
So you can start going, what's improbable but not madly improbable? Oh, you two are long-lost siblings. And suddenly you're creating narrative connections and personal connections rather than manipulating rocks and throwing cows at people. And that was really interesting. That suddenly gave us a really different angle on how, first of all, magic might be used, but also how the game might be used and how important a mage could be. But talking about the tone of the game and the tone of Tudor England and stuff, it's low-key magic. It's not showy magic. It's not fireballs and lightning bolts. I suppose lightning bolts not that improbable, but summoning a fireball,
if you're outside,
not going to happen in a dungeon.
But there aren't any dungeons.
The bottom of castles, there bloody are. That's where you put your prisoners.
That's true. You got to break out one of your assassins after they get caught.
Yeah.
Having gone through the assassin adventure, I'm like, no, jail's great. It doesn't rain on me here.
I do get the impression that there's an assassin-based economy in the world of Maelstrom. There's just so many of these guys running around. Getting captured, being forced to assassinate people, sending waves of assassins after a mage. It's just...
And in such a grim crapsack world, I would think that, being a mage is very powerful because there are so many terrible things happening all the time that if you have a beef with someone, it's like, if they got a cut on their hand, would it be infected? Yeah, that's very likely. Oh, would the apothecary overcharge them for the medicine they need to survive the infection? Oh, yeah, that's very likely. Would the infection kill them? Oh, that's right. Wow. Yeah. So what are the chances that this guy's going to put his hand down on a nail? Oh, pretty likely.
You need someone to die in 2 weeks, yeah.
In 2 weeks, yeah. I haven't read it yet, but have you guys seen the book Lucky Day by Chuck Tingle?
No.
It's on my list. I haven't bought it yet.
Yeah, I saw it in the bookstore the other day, but resisted the temptation to drop my money because I was already getting a different book. And it is about it sounds like it's about a luck apocalypse where just horrifically unlikely terrible things are happening to everybody. So yeah, sounds good.
No, it's I like the magic system because it was a very elegant solution as an alternative to the list of spells, like to fit a full RPG in a 300-page paperback.
100%.
It's a good idea. I just think the implementation is a little punishing, but that's inconsistent with everything else. Characters are not very good at things, and they're not going to be able to succeed most of the time. And that includes the wizards. Yeah, you're a wizard.
Yeah,
but you're kind of a shit wizard along with everyone else.
The crapsack world can be fun for a while, but very hard to make.
What kind of adventures did you run in Maelstrom when you were back in the day, James? Like, what do you remember?
I mean, this is the rare game that Ross has not run a campaign of.
It's true.
The two that come to mind, I mean, the campaign I ran, we started off with essentially the scenario that's in the book. You're traveling down to London and, modified along the way. The players got involved in a conspiracy. I cannot remember the details, but I do remember we were leading up to the execution of Anne Boleyn in the Tower of London, who, of course, who Henry VIII had failed to divorce and was in the process of splitting the Church of England away from Rome. But he had accused her of being a witch. And so there were various factions, some of whom were anti-Henry, some of whom were anti-Anne, some of whom were pro or anti-witches. And the big climax was kind of an assault on the Tower of London to try and get her out. And it turned out she was a witch, and really quite a powerful one. And things went bad at that point. And it was a lot of it was kind of romping around Tudor London, because we'd all been educated in the UK. We all had a pretty good, and we all lived in London. We all had a pretty good sense of what it would be like. And it was just fun to be in that city at that time and have those kind of random city encounters. I did not draw on City Book 1 that we talked about in an earlier episode, but talked about, that kind of inspiration of everybody knows everybody, because it's not a huge city at that point. And and one of the characters was noble and was well connected with the guilds. I can't remember how the guilds came into it, the mercantile guilds. And it just became labyrinthine and huge. It was hugely fun. And then the second one was a much tighter one-off adventure, again starting in St Albans, except I had them start off in Saffron Walden, because I have a Victorian facsimile of a pamphlet published in 1669, which I will link to in the show notes, called The Flying Serpent, or Strange News Out of Essex, being a true relation of a monstrous serpent, which hath divers times been seen at a parish called Henham on the Mount, within 4 miles of Saffron Walden. And it's just like, it's 12 pages, I think, talking about this monstrous serpent that somebody has recently seen. And then talking about, well, there was the cockatrice that someone saw down the road from Saffron Walden a few years previously. And this is 1669. This is pretty, we're post the Renaissance. We're in the age of the Enlightenment by this point, pretty much.
The Enlightenment is not equally distributed.
a good point. But yes, this was a printed, published pamphlet that was sold, well, presumably on the streets of London, presumably in Saffron Walden as well. Even 100 years later, people actually believe that these things are rare, but real. And so I had them, they were transporting supposedly a cask of ale to the great ale fair that was happening in Southwark at the time, which rumour had it that Henry himself might come along and King Henry might come and judge because he likes a pint of ale or 3. And they swiftly discovered that there was not, in fact, ale in the barrel that they were transporting. There was a baby cockatrice, which got out, a thing that could turn you to stone if you meet its gaze. It's like a Medusa in the form of, a chick, basically. It's not even a cockerel, it's a chick. It's about 4 days old. And the idea was a very elaborate assassination plot. And they basically had to deal with it. And it was great, because there was this sense that it was rooted in the real world, and suddenly there's this Greek-style monster wandering around, just turning villagers to stone. It was a brilliant evening's entertainment. I was really pleased with how it went and how they finally got. I think they dropped a bucket on it in the end, but in the same way that you do with a spider. It wasn't, they didn't squash it with the bucket. They had to upturn the bucket, and it's like, well, what do we do? Because we can't lift the bucket because then it would see us. And I can't remember what they did in the end. I think they might
throw a blanket on top of the bucket and just leave it. We're gonna put a dirty rock on top of the bucket and get on with our lives until some poor bastard needs a bucket.
You gotta.
So it was.
That does sound great.
Yeah, so they were picaresque adventures. They were just kind of traveling from place to place, and things would happen to you, or you'd happen upon schemes. And there were a lot of people traveling around, lots of new communities. The monasteries had just been basically closed down, or were about, depending on exactly when I set the adventure, were about to be or had just been closed down by Henry VIII. And, so you had colonies of nuns and monks just kind of setting up, going, we're not a monastery. Really, we're not. We're just friends.
We're just roomies, man. It's expensive with it. What that made me think of what you described, James, I'm guessing that with both of these, there was a lot of what you might call failing fun word, where it's, I beefed my endurance roll and now my character is sloppy drunk instead of just fun tipsy. That, I beefed my attack roll, so, it just turns into this, the two of us are wrestling in the mud, getting our hats dirty. I was like, Maelstrom should work for horror or for comedy, because those are the ones where the next cool thing can be, oh man, I really stuck my foot, not in it, but clean on through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Charlie Chaplin was British, of course. Stan Laurel of Laurel and Hardy was British, steeped in this tradition of watching someone else fall over and hurt themselves is the biggest laugh you can get.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that style of play also, the picaresque, wandering the countryside, was very popular in the first generation of RPGs, just in general. It was the roving band, the roving adventurers. And that style of play is actually has never really gone entirely out of style. Like, it's certainly not less popular now than it was back then, because that was the only thing back then. But you can even see that sort of style of play happening in video games now. There are games like DayZ and Rust and other games where you are built in this highly simulated world that is kind of like, all right, well, do whatever you're going to do. Or even Dwarf Fortress or RimWorld or games like that, where like things happen and there's no real there's the story that is happening, but it's not one that has a neat beginning, middle, and end. It's just whatever you make it. You keep playing.
There's a story, but there's not a narrative.
Yeah. There we go. That's a good way to look at it, and that can be a lot of fun.
What's the moral of the story, man? The moral of the story is that the stories are amoral. They're just a pile of stuff that happens.
Because in some way, it's kind of like we're developing this hobby, role-playing games, and we're going to figure out what can be done with them. And so let's just mess around in this system, in the setting, and see what kind of fun we have. And then, by the mid-'80s, let's start developing this is fun, messing around and getting in shenanigans, but why don't we have a more something that actually matters? And then Warhammer Fantasy pops up, and there's that progression that Greg talks about.
Yeah.
Do want to mention, looking up this game, I did find a review of it that came out this year, February 2.
A review of Maelstrom from this year.
I'll put a link in there. It is on the RPG Gazette. What's really fun, at the end of it, they link to a interview with Alexander Scott from a Norwegian zine called, I'm going to butcher this, but Amaga Noem. It's from 2004, the interview is. And he actually mentions you, James.
Oh, good Lord.
And
So wait, what's the reverse of take a drink? Do people now need to spit in their cups?
And he says he was 16 when he contacted Puffin. I'm just impressed that this 60-year-old went up to Penguin
16.
and he's like, "Hey, you want to publish my book?" And they're just like, "Yeah, sure, all right, sounds good." And they just put it out.
It was a magical time. Things could happen.
It was a magical time. Yeah, things could happen. So apparently he still has a bunch of Maelstrom material buried in a cardboard box somewhere in the loft. And it's been republished. But yeah, this is a fascinating look at again, a robust, complete system. It has some good ideas in it. It could have used some playtesting and editing, but what RPG doesn't. And for its time, I mean, I really like the form factor of it, just in this trade paperback with so much material in it, and it's just so easy to get into.
Yeah, and there's many more games published in that kind of digest size these days. But back in the day, particularly, AD&D was 3 hardback books even back then,
or a box set.
Or the box set. The price on the back of mine, £2, £1.95, which admittedly is 1984 money, but still, that's not really very much for a complete game that is still fun to play today.
Any final thoughts, James? I think we got to cover it.
It's worth saying it is still in print. There's a British publisher, Arion, who have reprinted it and done new material for it. They've also revived the Advanced Fighting Fantasy Role-Playing game and a number of others. It's a large driver of RPG sales is nostalgia these days. Though they're doing a good job with, the new material is really interesting. And I have not seen the Maelstrom Companion, but apparently it describes Bury St. Edmunds as the ideal place to set an adventure. That's where my mum lives. So it is a town I know really well. And it was a town that had a huge monastery. It was a very important religious town. And then, of course, Henry VIII closed the monastery down. And it kind of, it went to not exactly rack and ruin at that point, but you can still wander around. This is going to sound ridiculous. My mum used to live in a house that was built into the ruins of the old abbey. I will include a photograph of it in the show notes because otherwise people won't believe me.
Outstanding.
It was an insane house. So we've said this before. In Britain, we are surrounded by history. I do remember, many years ago, wandering around, being shown around Harvard by a girlfriend who worked there. And she was like, this is one of the oldest buildings on campus. This is just over 100 years old. And I was going, wow, well, in 400 years, it'll be as old as my parents' house. That's not the house built into the abbey, just the house they happened to be living at the time, which was part Tudor.
Wow, James, how come you didn't stay with her?
Yeah.
She was lovely, but she was in America. It wouldn't have worked.
Okay, all right,
fair enough. One of the things that also occurred to me is that like this game being set in a very like historical setting, and also the game is also has various like, oh, if you want to know more about that, read history books. I don't know, man. I'm not an expert. Yeah. Like there's a bibliography, and they talk about like you should know this stuff because it assumes obviously that you're British. And you can't really do that for an American game because like the only two periods in American history that would even be vaguely comparable that you could assume Americans wouldn't be taught something about that in school would be the Revolutionary War, the Civil War. But like. One, Americans are geographically dispersed in a way that like the majority of Americans aren't going to be near Revolutionary War era, places. And the Civil War is obviously that's military, you're a soldier. It doesn't have the same connection that like, Tudor England and like you're in London or London, you can get to London easily. Like there's the way Americans think of history versus British is sort of like that you couldn't do an American version of Maelstrom.
Cough, the Old West, cough.
But that's not taught in like history books. Like this was set in the Tudor.
The westward expansion, kind of.
But like not in the way that like James is talking about in terms of like you knew what people were like in Tudor England. You knew like what their lifestyle was like. You knew like that kind of thing. They weren't given that like
people know what.
Yeah, a lot of the stately homes are still standing. There are, certainly in Suffolk, which is where Bury St. Edmunds is. Or in London, there are a school trip would be to Sackford Hall. Sackford Hall. I'll correct it. Which every summer invites reenactors in, and they basically LARP Tudor England for about 2 months. Or Hampton Court, which a great Tudor palace.
2 months. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. They love it. But yeah, and you would go on school trips to these places and you just really get a sense of kind of the living history.
Yeah.
The one thing we've not talked about, and we probably should because the game is named after it, is the Maelstrom, which only covers 3 pages. And it's a kind of weird 3 pages. The Maelstrom is kind of the source of the magic and energy and stuff like that, but is also, I think, an opening, a kind of hope that the game might go somewhere else. And there is some talk about it. You could play characters from any things, but you can jump into the Maelstrom, it says in the final paragraph on the Maelstrom section, and you could emerge anywhere, like the Roman Empire or the far future.
Yeah, they talk about like in the opening of the book, the first examples, like you're being chased by cannibals and the Incan Empire, they mentioned the Incas several times. So like, yeah, there is that vague thing you could go off in other places.
So before this wanted to be GURPS before there was GURPS.
Oh, well, maybe the thought of, GURPS,
yeah.
But yeah.
I think more like what Chaosium was doing with the Worlds of Wonder, the box set that had Superworld and I forget the other 2. It was using the BRP system, but it was 3 setting books in a single box set.
Yeah.
Yes, doing that kind of thing. But the whole idea, the Maelstrom does seem like doesn't really fit somehow. It feels like there could easily have been another 20 pages expanding the philosophy of magic within the game and how the Maelstrom fitted in there. It's always, I've never quite worked out how to integrate it in a game without the game suddenly becoming very high power and multi-genre and just a bit silly. And I think the one thing that Maelstrom isn't, it can be quite slapstick, but it's not silly. I think it takes itself quite seriously.
Yes. Agreed.
No, I mean, like the herb section has like realistic illustrations of every herb. I just hope whatever gamer like went out there, some British schoolboy like going out through the gardens or through the fields and be like, look, throw wax. This is definitely throw wax. This will restore flesh to scars, healing them. Yes, I'll get that. And or I'll eat this. And hopefully he didn't poison himself too bad.
Yeah, there were warnings that this is what people in Tudor England thought these plants did.
Yeah,
but yeah, the herb list is like the spell list in other games.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Yes, there's 20 pages of it. You can be a herbalist, and it goes into lovely detail about the herbs you can use.
The herbalist would have been a pretty good class, except that to prepare one herb takes weeks. So, it would be tremendous book.
You can't be you have to be a crap wizard. You have to be a crap herbalist too. There's no getting out of this. It's a crap sack world.
No one here gets out uncrapped.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Thank you for those additional thoughts. This is a really interesting book. Again, thank you to Kvetch to send me this copy. Yeah. And thank you, James, for picking this.
It's a weird old gem.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, it's very hard for me to be objective about it. It's been part of my role-playing landscape since 1984 when it came out. There's a thanks to section where there's about 3 or 4 Jameses. I'm told I'm the second or third one in it. But yeah, I've had some fantastic. It's a fun little system. Don't try and make it a convention, a standard American D&D style role playing game. Take it only at its own strengths and weaknesses, I would say. And I think the key word that's come out of all of this is picaresque. Just let it kind of be a journey. Things happen along the journey. You'll make contact, and in particular with the magic, don't try and do D&D magic with it. Work out what you can tweak that that is going to be fairly easy for even a low-level wizard to do. And my players came up with some brilliant, all of which is slipping my mind now. But really, when you think about it, actually, it'd be very easy to have that just fall off the shelf into their tea. Simple as that.
It sounds like the bit from the Deadpool movie with you. What's your mutation? I'm really, really lucky. That's not a superpower. That's a bullshit superpower. And then 45 minutes later, oh my God, luck is the best superpower.
There's a whole movie. There's a William H. Macy movie where he is... The Cooler, yes. Which starts off with him being the unlucky guy, or the guy who brings unluck to people. So, of course, he works for a casino. And then he falls in love. I'm spoiling a little bit of the movie, but he falls in love and his power changes. And it's a lovely movie.
I've talked about Intacto, right?
Ooh.
Yes.
The Spanish.
Yeah. I think you mentioned it on
the Spanish thriller about so good of basically subculture of luck vampires.
Oh, and the Deadpool character is Domino for our listeners at home.
Yep.
Yeah. So check out Maelstrom if you can get the PDF, or if you it's probably...
It does use will a lot.
There's a will attribute. So but it does use will as the future conditional as well. So the next episode will be a Call of Cthulhu scenario in medias res by John Scott Tynes.
Wait, is it really by John Scott Tynes, or do people just say it's by John Scott Tynes?
At this point, I can't even tell anymore.
Yes.
It lies within Tynes' shadow.
Yes. So that'll be fun to review, especially as we move as we're recording this. October looms closely. So,
season's coming.
Yep. So thank you so much for backing our Kickstarter for this season. And thank you for listening to this episode. And if you haven't backed it, we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.